Egun on guztioi, asko posten nau BBK-kuna.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you all here today to this Kuna Center. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being here on this second day of the conference on the geopolitics of technology. And as I was saying in Basque just a moment ago, welcome to the second day of this conference organized by Governance, in which we are analyzing the impact of technology on the geopolitical scene. Thank you very much once again for supporting us. Thank you to the Bilbao City Centre, BBK, and also to the General Secretariat for Digitalization. We have some fantastic speakers today. We will be thinking with them on the different aspects and challenges of technology in the geopolitical scene. We're going to have a look at the different roles that states and administrations will be playing in the future. We'll be talking about society. We'll be talking about all sorts of different issues, all related to artificial intelligence. And to start, I will pass the floor to Cristian Prieto, who is the director of BBK Kuna. Thank you very much, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here with us this morning. Thank you very much, Xavier, from the Bilbao City Centre. Thank you very much to Juanjo Alvarez and to Governance in general. Thank you very much for all your help and for inviting us to be here today. Now, today we've got a very interesting program ahead of us. I would just like to thank all of you for having chosen BBK Kuna, the Center for Sustainable Development, to hold your conference. Now, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We're going to be talking about different issues, which are hot topics today. And it's important to understand and to think about this because these are important issues today. As I was saying in Basque, artificial intelligence is something that everyone is talking about, and it's important for us to think about it. We have different panel sessions, we have different talks, which are going to give us a lot of interesting information about this global issue that recognizes no borders and which requires a deep process of reflection so that we can all rise to these challenges in the most effective way possible. So that we can benefit society in general, because in the 21st century, without doubt, is not going to let us rest on our laurels. There are many, many challenges that we are facing. And now in artificial intelligence and technology in general has become part of everything that we do. In the yesterday, in the first session, someone said that artificial intelligence is not just changing what, but who, and mainly who. It's changing the way in which we present ourselves to the world, which is why we need to have an ethical approach to this, which will limit or not, we'll have to decide that, the terms on which society wants to define itself in relation to the use of new technologies. And how does all this affect democracy? Well, I'm not going to answer that question. That's what you're here to do. But society, power, and technology, this is what Mark Coeckelbergh is going to be talking about. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you here. We're talking about challenges, and maybe more than challenges, transitions, I think is what we should be talking about. We all know what these challenges are, especially in BBK Kuna. We work to try to find collaborative answers to these challenges. We work on economic inequality, climate change, pandemic, cybersecurity, privacy, protection of personal data, governance on the internet, etc. And then the binomials, technology, and ethics. And we're also going to include all stakeholders, and that's really important to include all stakeholders in this discussion. And in order to do that, we need to work together. We need to co-create on the basis of responsibility and respect in order to move towards a greater degree of security that will protect everyone and won't leave anyone behind, which is the topic of the interesting talk we had yesterday afternoon here. Artificial intelligence systems are very important in all of this. We need to make sure that people have equal access to technology so that technology doesn't widen the already very large gaps between different segments of society, because equal opportunities is absolutely vital. Events such as this are so important because they foster knowledge, they foster collaboration, and this is absolutely necessary to empower people, companies, the academia, public institutions, so that we can help everyone make informed decisions. It's really important to have these kind of events then, because it will help to have a greater impact. Working together, again, collaboration is absolutely vital in all of this. And here at the BBK Cune Center, it's one of our maxims. We always try to include as many stakeholders as possible so that we can have a maximum effect. So we're delighted to have the Bilbao European Encounters being held here in this center. So I would like to welcome you once again and to say thank you once again to all of you for being here. And as I said right at the beginning of my intervention, this is your house. You please feel at home here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cristian Preto. I'm now going to pass the floor to Juanjo Alvarez, who is the Secretary General of the Governance Institute for Democratic Governance. Good morning, everyone. Xavier, Cristian, first of all, well, as I'm the Secretary General of Governance, I've been asked to give this very brief introduction. But first of all, I would like to thank the Bilbao City Council. I'd also like to thank BBK Cuna. I feel really at home here in Vizcaya and here especially in Bilbao. I'm been asked to give an institutional opening, which means that I can say everything or I can say nothing. I feel like a kind of sort of an errant pseudo-intellectual, a kind of quasi-expert. So I'm going to talk now much more from the point of view of constructive pessimism, really. And I'm sure that Mark will be talking about many of these issues, and these issues will come up again in the town table later on. It's the idea of meshing two very complex worlds, and academics, what we generally try to do is to go back to our origins to find the answers. I don't have the answers, and since I don't have the answers, I'm going to ask some questions. First of all, in the analog world, in the world that we live in, basically, it's not the same seeing this from home as being here today and be able to exchange a smile or a nod, to feel the human warmth that exists in this room today. It's very different, these two different realities. They're two different realities that have some parallel elements, but are very different. And talking about multilateralism and talking about something which is really important, such as, for example, the geopolitics of technology and the oxymoron of artificial intelligence, if we're going to do that, it means that we have to sort of start thinking about what the world that we're building now will look like in the future. I have the feeling that as a society which is nurtured by technology and still fairly lacking in civic values, I remember that Guru Tauragi told us that there were 3 geopolitical models of the world, and we have to work out where technology and artificial intelligence fits in. We're going back to the first of these models now, which is military dominance of the Roman Empire, which means that through war we try to dominate. The second model was the Phoenician model. In the 19th century, the British ruled the world because they ruled the waterways. And now we have the communication, the era of domination through communication. Communication can do much more damage than a missile. So we had the Phoenician model, which is what Europe grew up on, taking all our trade over to Asia and then relying on America to defend us and Russia to give us gas. If we want to start to compete and we want to decide how Europe of the future wants to look like, we need to decide what sort of geopolitical structure we want to support. And talking of ethics, Christian already said this very, very, very clearly. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It's very clear what the relationship is. There can be no government without ethics, and you can be incredibly ethical and not a good governor. So you can't separate these two issues. We need to aim to work to increase and improve people's quality of life. That's the instrumental aim. But social cohesion, inequality, the many gaps that exist and the divides, can they be corrected or not by technology? That's the real question. And some years ago, we still weren't talking about artificial intelligence, but sociologists, some key sociologists were saying that the American society had the highest number of televisions connected to the world, and televisions were supposed to open you up to the world. It's not television anymore, it's other things. But they said that even so, even though theoretically it's the society that's best informed in the world, if watching telly can be seen as being well informed, but in fact, it's the society which develops the fewest number of ethical values, in which there's a kind of a collapse of the society in everyday life, in the sense of communication between people, contact between people, the search for empathy, and that we leave all that to one side. And we choose the comfort and the convenience of technology over human contact. It's often much easier to just send an email or send a message rather than actually pick up the telephone and talk to people. And this generates a different type of relationship. And I think what we need to do is maybe humanize the way we use technology. We are at the moment in a time when there is a large amount of institutional weakness. We're celebrating the 78th anniversary of the United Nations, and it's breaking down, not because of the people who are directing it. I think they do represent quite a very, very good set of values, more so than in the past. But there's an institutional instability and weakness. This is the wall moment, when the Berlin Wall collapsed, and we had the Warsaw Pact and everything else happened. I think that we're now at another wall moment here. We don't know what's going to happen. Because we can't, because after the war we had perestroika, we had all sorts of different things happening there. Different independent republics came out of the Soviet Union. I don't know if we are at another wall moment, but I think that if we're trying to forecast or predict the future, it's difficult. It's really difficult. The future is going to be completely different from the present, and technology shouldn't be the future. It should be something used in the future to make the world more civic. It shouldn't be an end in and of itself. It should just be a means. So when we're talking about sustainability and ethics in the era of technology, is that we're apologizing before we've even done something wrong. We're trying to find justifications for what we do, and we shouldn't be doing this. We should try to decide what we want to find and where we want to move towards. There's a moment of historic discontinuity, of disruption, and this disruption is generated by the chronocompetence provoked by technology, and everything's moving so fast that it just makes us tired. We get the feeling that we're being swept along with everything that's happened, and we never really get the time to stop and think about everything. It's very unusual to have a group of people such as all of us, those who are here today. It's very unusual for us to stop and think, to have the time to get together. It's really good to see that. And because there are many people at home who are maybe reading the newspaper while they're listening to us, it's much, but it's important to stop and think very carefully, because this is what politics is all about. Politics is about people and encounters and other approaches. And then what shall I say about multilateralism? I mean, we can talk about the insignificance of the European Union, but in the third model of geopolitical dominance, we have the Greek model, which has to do with values, democracy understood in its proper term. And that culture flourished, and it has survived in an imperfect form, but it has survived down the ages. But in order to do this, to help it to flourish more, we need to generate trust. Trust is the most important value that we can have in this world. Technology, is it concerned with trust? I think it makes us more autonomous, more independent, theoretically at least, but at the same time, much less able to reach consensus. And in fact, that's what we need to be doing at the moment. We can't do that through technology alone. And I think that's an important element to take into account. I also wondered that maybe that there's an oligarchy in the technological world as well, because we always criticize these different spheres of power, but I think there's an oligarchy in the technological world as well. I get that feeling as well, and that we have this technological leadership there and the dominance through that, because the technological leaders have the ability to influence many, many things in the world. As I said, collective thinking. Well, I think there's a kind of a derooting of collective structures, which is why sport and football is so important these days, because there aren't any collective structures today that are able to actually reach a consensus among people who are different. Will technology do that? Will technology be able to do that? I mean, how is that going to be done? And Europe has to compete in that, believing that it's insignificant? Because to finish with what I started talking about, we had this kind of bipolar Cold War. We've moved on from that. We've moved on to, we had the liberal leadership of the United States and Iraq and Afghanistan, and decisions made on this idea of an empire, building democracy by destroying states, which is an oxymoron in itself. And then all of a sudden, we can see a different type of reality emerging. And we're worried about what Europe's position is going to be in this new world order. But I don't think we should be worried about that. Now, we're talking about sustainable competitiveness. We do that a lot in Bebekakune. But the tool of technology, or the purpose of technology, shouldn't be to search for leadership. Technology should be used to search for greater civic commitment, social cohesion, what we can do to have a more cohesive society. Now, I know I'm talking about more doubts than, I'm not giving you more questions than answers, but I'd just like to leave you with one final idea, a bit of food for thought for all of you. Who acts as a counterweight to the power that emerges through technology? Because the great risk here is that we just leave technology to get on with it, to just go where it wants, and it's just like a cork bobbing around on the ocean. We don't know where it's going to end up. And in technology, there's something that is linked to leisure, with connectedness between people, also the industrial side of things as well. But I think it's a tool that requires a much more relaxed and deep-rooted analysis than the analysis we generally tend to engage in. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Alvarez. Thank you very much for those interesting words. Now we're going to hear from Xavier Ochandiano, who works at the Bilbao City Council. He's the Councillor for Economic Development, Trade and Employment. Mr. Ochandiano, the floor is all yours. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bilbao.
Thank you very much to Governance. Thank you very much to Bebekakune. And thank you very much to you, Juanjo, especially. Now, Juanjo and myself, we don't know each other very well. We've coincided more recently in a couple of more informal settings. But I have listened to you many times, and now, Juanjo, having to talk after you is very difficult, because as a politician, I think that politicians generally have the temptation to always go around saying that they know all about everything, but I certainly don't. I'm not a technologist. I'm not an expert in international politics, but I am a councilman here in Bilbao, and many things that you said really resonated with me, because you can see that stress is palpable here in the city. So we have the global challenges that exist in the geopolitical level, but they are actually materialized in a small city such as Bilbao, in a small country such as the Basque Country. So from Bilbao, with a lot of humility, and we understand that we are small, we do try to contribute to solving these problems. There's a word that what we try, and I like the word contribute. I looked it up, and the definition is is that you work with others to try to solve a problem. That's what contribute means, and I think that's the key, working with others. So we're all working together today, and I'm going to be here today to learn from all of you, but also to do my bit as well. And something that I could add to the many very interesting comments that Juanjo made, and this is something I see at a local level with regard to the use of technology, and it's something that concerns me. It's also an opportunity as well, I believe. In politics, we can see how through technology, we're able to bring about and develop new tools for representative citizen engagement. And I'm very concerned about the current political context, in which it seems that we're just bumping along between different models. We have this participatory model, which is very complex, but we want to have a true representative model, which represents citizens. Truly, there are a lot of individual voices, there are a lot of vested interests, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. I'm not going to go into that now. But at a very micro level, I think that technology could really help us to develop true representative models, because that stress that we are experiencing in politics and the dispersion and the scattering of citizens, and you actually mentioned sport, but I'm going to mention music as well. And if you go home with just this idea, then I'll be happy. Of all the different artistic expressions, I think that music is the one that most people love. And it doesn't matter what we're talking, what sort of genre we're talking about. Everyone has their own personal taste, but everybody loves some kind of music. Music, I think in the field of art and culture, it has a huge value and it brings together people. It has that potential. So just to add another layer of complexity to this, we need to use technology well in order to develop true participatory instruments and mechanisms. I think that could help to reduce the stress that we all live in politics, in the local environment, etc. Now, I will be able to stay for a little bit, at least. I'm going to at least listen to some of you, and I will hopefully learn very much. And I wish you all a very pleasant day today and a very good weekend as well. Right, well, we're going to remove the podium now, and you have a QR code on the screen there if any of you need simultaneous interpreting for the next presentation, and you can do that through your mobile phones. Now, let me introduce you now to a prominent figure in the field of philosophy and technology. He is particularly well known in the work in the intersection between ethics, technology, and society. The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence is one of his books in which very clearly and concisely he talks about the possibilities and the risks of our technological society. And just a few months ago, he published another book called Philosophy, the Political Philosophy of Artificial Intelligence. He's going to be talking now about the asymmetries of power in technology globalization and the multilateralism of artificial intelligence. I will now pass the floor over to Mark Coeckelbergh. Mark, welcome.
Before the slides are put on, good morning, Egunon, buenos días. It's a pleasure to be here in Bilbao. It's the first time I'm here. and so far it has been a wonderful experience. So thank you very much for the hospitality of the organizers and the sponsors here. Today I want to talk about AI and more the politics and power aspects of this. Can you hear me well everywhere? Yeah. Okay. Let me start. So I'm a philosopher of technology. This is a rare species, but becomes more and more common today because there are many philosophical questions that we can ask about technology. And more interestingly for me, we can ask technologies. The new technologies, they challenge us to ask again the old philosophical questions. And I've done this for the ethics of AI and more moving to the politics of AI and using political philosophy next to philosophy of technology to think about this. The book is also translated in Spanish and is available from Cátedra. So in case that you would like to read in Spanish. AI, there's a lot to say about it. AI is very much in the public attention. Sometimes it's also a concept that is used to talk about everything. I think there are very specific problems with AI, in particular the machine learning applications that we have today. For example, generative AI. And when I was doing AI ethics, I found that more and more the problems I looked at were not only problems at the individual level, but were also societal problems and political problems. Considering, for example, oops, did I do that? So, for example, questions about labor and employment. Yeah? If AI is used for automation, then of course this has consequences for employment and has direct consequences for our communities, cities, countries, and so on. So this is just one issue. I also got more interested in the links between AI and democracy. Can AI threaten democracy, but maybe also can AI help democracy? What can we do there? And so I started to use political philosophy to think about AI. On the one hand, to better understand the technologies and their impact on politics and society, but also to talk about politics and make the argument that political issues nowadays are deeply entangled with the technological issues, with the digital media that we use. And it's important, I think, to think again about what is politics, what is democracy today, thereby keeping in mind that these technologies are not neutral but have unintended effects. We want to do things with technology, so we have clear goals, but we also, by using technology, have effects on the world, on each other, on our lives that are not always intended. Sometimes good influences, sometimes things that we need to do something about. So what did I do? I looked at some political principles and principles that are also very important for democracy, including freedom, equality and justice, democracy and power. And I also asked the question at the end of the presentation, like, yeah, for whom? Is it only for humans, or maybe can politics also be about the non-humans somehow? So I first thought about freedom in the context of climate change. I will not go deep into this now, but this is in the book Green Leviathan. And currently I'm working on democracy, where I'm interested in, of course, phenomena like the manipulation of elections by the use of AI. It will be interesting, for example, to see now when there are elections coming up in the US, for example, how AI will impact those elections. But also in Europe, there have been cases where it has been argued that AI had impact, I believe in Czech Republic, for example. Then I looked at also democracy versus authoritarianism. Even in Europe nowadays there are authoritarian tendencies, and so I was interested, like, how might AI impact this democracy, authoritarianism tension. And then more philosophically, what is democracy really, and what do we need for democracy? And according to me, and also like based on the landscape of political philosophy, one can distinguish between the kind of thin conceptions of democracy, where democracy is just about voting, and more richer conceptions of democracy, where democracy is also about participation, representation, and the deliberation also. And I think I heard some of these keywords also from the people who introduced the topic. So that is important for me. What do we need in the end for democracy? And one can look further into the conditions also. Is it really enough that we just have individuals voting, or do we need some kind of goal for our society? Do we need, for example, to talk about the common good? In my new book there will be more on this. And also knowledge, because you can talk about participation and deliberation, but if citizens don't know, for example, what AI is, if citizens are not informed about the society and the complex issues, it's not so easy, complex issues that we're facing today, then of course democracy doesn't work very well. So we need also to work on this knowledge basis. And that can be from academia, but also from other initiatives, like here, thinking about geopolitics, about globalization and so on. So what I want to do in this talk is to introduce some of the themes of the book Political Philosophy of AI, but with a focus on power, and then going to the end to themes of global governance and more in the context of what's happening with the planet. So let me start with this. I take a little... How does AI impact our political principles, and particularly the principles that we think are important for democracy? So since the Enlightenment, freedom, liberty is one of the principles that we have, we think is important. Now, there are formal freedoms in all our constitutions. In Europe banned slavery, for example. But the question is also, how free are people really? And then it's interesting that political philosophy differentiates between negative freedom, which means leave me alone, don't interfere with me. So that's about citizens that don't want too much interference with what they do. Can be the state, but also big companies, for example, that interfere with what you want to do. And positive freedom is more about your autonomy and your inner freedom, so to speak, that you are the one who controls your desires, for example, or controls your life. So it's also important for people, right? So these are two kind of values, and AI impacts both of them, because AI enables nation states to put people under surveillance if they want, and to analyze their data and do something there. So that can, of course, lead to even imprisonment and so on. So their negative freedom is at stake. But also positive freedom, we can influence, with the help of AI and data science, influence, analyze, and make sure that people tend to make certain choices rather than others. And the term for this is nudging. It already happened in the supermarket when some products are put, for example, at the checkout. Maybe I don't want to buy chocolate, but the chocolate is lying at the checkout and I'm going to buy the chocolate. This is not coercion. It's not interfering with my negative liberty. No one is forcing me to buy the chocolate, but someone changes what in academic terms is called my choice architecture. So the choice architecture changes and I'm more inclined to buy this chocolate. So what's going on? This exploits our human psychology, which is not only about reason, but we have also part of our nature works in a way that is not conscious, and that works with that. Is it necessarily bad? Well, one could say, like, well, for the sake, for example, of the environment, we should nudge people into more environmental behavior. But the cost of this, or the problem with this, is that it's still a form of manipulation. It's a threat to human autonomy. You circumvent people's ability to reason and to see themselves as master of themselves. So we treat people as means to ends when we use this for policy. But of course, it's also at the same time tempting to say, like, yeah, we need in a mass society to have some influence from government on citizens' behavior. So it's a complex issue, but I merely want to show that there are these different sides now. Justice is another problem where AI impacts. As you probably are aware, there have been many cases where this fairness and justice are impacted by AI because there has been bias, for example, in facial recognition systems where entire ethnicities have not been recognized by the system, for example. And so you have bias in the technical system. You have bias also that can be enhanced or can be amplified when AI is used in also increasingly to make juridical decisions, or by companies for credit scoring, and also by the welfare state, right, who always wants some form of surveillance and some form of profiling people. But how far should this go? How far should the state here intervene again in the person's freedom? But also, what does this mean? How are people treated here by means of technology? So again, a complex issue because, of course, a welfare state has limited means. So you need to make a distinction, for example, between who receives certain benefits and who does not. But how to do this in a fair and just way. And when AI is used, then there is a danger that this is done in a very bureaucratic kind of way, and in a way that's not fair because no one interferes with, no one discusses the fairness. The algorithm is used, and then there is a result. I argued in the book that we need to talk then from political philosophy point of view, we need to talk about justice and fairness again. What do we think is a just and fair society? It's also not so easy. There are different views, and in academia there are different theories of what justice is. Some people are more using a liberal universalist view. Some people appeal to identities, groups, and some people to a more Marxist framework, talking about AI capitalism, for example. So there are very much different ways of seeing, like, what is a just society, what is really the problem with justice in our society. And I think with AI, enables us to, again, have these discussions openly in a democracy. Yeah, of course, if you don't have a democracy, you don't need to discuss this, but in a democracy, you need to discuss what is a just society. And so I think AI forces us to ask these questions again. Then democracy, what does it mean again? I said that there are these more richer conceptions about deliberation and participation, but that's also always then a practical question, how to organize this, and what exactly, how to make people participate also. Not everyone wants maybe to participate. How to encourage that, and how to organize, for example, a deliberation. What is a good discussion? Is a good discussion that on Twitter people just put their opinions? Or is a good discussion more about arguments and coming together in person, for example? So we need to think about that, because the new technologies offer new possibilities. We can have direct democracy if we want. We can have everyone vote from their computer. But is this a good way, or do we rather need to organize local and national processes of participation? So these are questions for democracy. Again, there's also authoritarian tendencies that can be enhanced by AI. And this can be very dangerous, where there is a kind of techno-solutionist understanding of politics. What is this? Think about the big tech companies, where the CEOs of these companies, the owners of these companies, they have certain political views, and they use the platforms to push these views. So this is a new thing that is possible, but also in the end a kind of techno-solutionism that creeps into our administrations and governments, where, of course, if you have the possibility to use the new technologies to influence the citizens again, then often it will and can be used. Think about China, who uses AI for surveillance, but also for influencing behavior through a social credit system. This is probably not what we want in Europe, but what do we want? Like, how exactly do we want to use expertise and technology in politics? This is also an old discussion already from Plato, who said, like, yeah, you shouldn't leave rule to the ordinary people. You should have the guardians who rule. So he thought that expertise is needed, but he thought about this in a more authoritarian way. If we want democracy, we don't want that, but still we want some kind of expertise. We live in this complex society with these technological problems, so we need expertise also in democracy. But how to organize it, still keeping democracy or even enhancing democracy, and still having the experts. And what we see today is that there's more and more in the area of AI, there is like advice by experts, also AI ethics experts, for example, also technical people, people from medical sector and so on. And yeah, this is, for now, this is advice, but we should think about mechanisms to have more permanent institutions that link experts and democratic institutions. And we came across these challenges already, for example, in the pandemic, where, of course, expertise was also very important. We needed expertise from people about, in that case, about COVID and how it spreads and so on. But there was a danger of authoritarianism. There was a danger that then decisions were made without sufficient democratic support. So this kind of tensions we will see more and more in the next years, decades, when technologies enable us to do so much with big data, with social media and so on. So this is a danger that are new means of control, and some talk like Subav about surveillance capitalism. I'm also interested in the conditions again, because this also leads us to ask the question, yeah, how can we on the long run in a more fundamental way ensure that democracy survives? And this also has to do with what is already there in the society. We see, for example, that in societies where there's a lot of trust still among people, that their totalitarianism and authoritarianism has less chance because there is no soil for that. But if you have a society that's deeply individualized, for example in the US now, then phenomena like right populism and perhaps also later authoritarianism have more chance. And Hannah Arendt already analyzed this. She talked about loneliness in modern society and also about the bureaucratic management of people. So here is again AI that can be used, data science already from the 19th century. It was used in a kind of biopolitics as Foucault analyzed it. Today, this can also be used, yeah, to what extent do we want to manage people, because the technology will not be neutral. The technology enables this and will push us to do more and more of this. On the other hand, in a modern society, one needs maybe some kind of bureaucracy, but how can we make sure again that there is a democratic legitimacy? Knowledge. I said already we need a knowledge basis for the citizens, informed citizens, but what if AI creates misinformation? What if AI influences also how I think about politics? Epistemic agency here refers to how I form my beliefs. So normally I would discuss with people about politics, I would think about issues. What happens today is that you have apps who tell you what kind of party you should vote for. This is not neutral. It will influence your voting behavior. And the same on social media, where you will encounter certain opinions and it will influence you. So we need to think about how the new technologies influence the knowledge bases, and also more positively not only what are the dangers, but can we use this in a way that strengthens the knowledge bases needed for democracy. Here is an academic article more on these issues about epistemology. So we need to think, what do we mean by democracy? What kind of democracy do we need? And the new technologies force us here to think about, okay, what are the conditions for democracy? And I'm sympathetic to those theories in political philosophy that think that democracy is not just a procedure or a bureaucratic way of voting or a form of government, but that there needs to be already some kind of mode of living together and some trust in society in order to make democracy work. So democracy is political, but it's also, there are questions about how can we strengthen the social fabric, how can we strengthen trust. And there, of course, politics also has an important role to play. So it's not enough to just want democracy. We need to, democracy is a kind of verb in that sense, right? A verb because it needs this deliberation, but also a verb in a sense of the living together, that the quality of that, of trying to improve that. Then I come to the issue of power, of course, where I think that the political power of AI can be analyzed in two kinds of powers. One is about big power, think about asymmetries of power between citizens and governments, but also between citizens, consumers, and the big tech companies. And we see it really shifts also even between states and these big tech companies, where the people who lead these companies and own these companies, they are received like presidents everywhere in the world, and that signals me that, of course, their power has risen significantly. So these new power asymmetries and power balances need to be accounted for, and also in a global context, the power balances between North and South, because there is a danger that AI helps us in Europe and the US and so on, but does not really benefit people everywhere in the world in the same way and to the same extent. So we need to think about this in a global context also. So there the more international and multilateralism is important. However, these big power questions are also related to small power. And with small power or micro power, I mean here a kind of power that Foucault analyzed as having to do with power relations in organizations, with power relations also in the relationships between human beings at the micro level. And here AI can also influence this, because if we for example, go online on social media, this is about the big companies influencing us. That's a big power, but it's also between people, because there's peer influence between citizens, between consumers, and yeah, this also can create a kind of idea that I am just data. I am the profile on the social media and so on. So interestingly here, this is about power, but also about like what is human being and what kind of citizenship do we want? Do we want a citizenship that's rooted in a view of human being that is more than data, or do we get influenced by seeing ourselves as something quantified, as mere data? So that is a danger there. Again, with AI, I've talked about how AI is used for self-improvement, because in a way we do it ourselves also by using these apps, for example, to track our health or our sport. There is the danger that we also come to see ourselves in this way as data producers. So new forms of subjectivity are emerging through AI. Finally, in the book, I ask, like, okay, now this is all democracy, politics about humans. Often we talk about human-centered AI, for example. Human-centered AI makes sense if that means that we don't let the technology decide the future of our societies and citizenship. But human-centered is also limited if we put this in the light of the wider ecologies in which we live, where we are so dependent on our environment, and where also others, non-human animals, non-human nature is there and maybe also deserves attention. So the question then is, are humans the only ones that should count politically? Can we move beyond an anthropocentric politics? There I'm influenced by post-humanism, for example, by thinking about animal rights, and indeed thinking about anthropocentrism. So to what extent can other species be part of our political world also? We can frame this in various ways. One can talk about rights, like in some countries they have given rights to environments or to rivers. One can think about this more in terms of interests, like animals can have a certain interest. For example, if we use them in an agricultural setting with modern technologies, including AI, of course they have an interest in their own life, in their own well-being. And so that is also political in that sense. So we need to, I think, include this in our thinking and think about what is the relation between humans and machines, for example. So I think AI should not be merely human-centered, and this needs to be further developed. But one needs the politics to go beyond the human, if only because we are so much relationally connected with the rest of nature. So to conclude, AI has this impact on political and democratic principles. There are dangers of authoritarianism. And one way to ask these questions is to ask them in terms of power. We can ask about the power AI has and the people who use AI to influence behavior. We can talk about the unequal power structures reinforced by AI. We can ask the question about democracy as a question of power. Who should have the power and how should power be exercised? And then finally, who should be included in that politics and democracy. I think that doesn't mean that AI is this bad thing or evil thing. AI can maybe also be used for example, in participative processes to help inform people, to help to come to a consensus. There have been experiments for that. If we give all the opinions of people, and then AI can help us to find like what could be a consensus. So I think human moderators need to play a role there, but AI too. And the process can be organized. I mean, generally digital technologies can organize this partly online, for example. But we need, next to these positive ways of using AI for democracy, we need nevertheless regulation. And this is also a local issue. But it's also a global issue, and there we can think about multilateralism and also supranationalism. So to some extent we have that already. The EU has a supranational aspect, and so we are, it's in a way trying out how this works, but also the global level is there. And that raises the question like, what about global governance of AI? And there are already efforts on the way at the level of the UN. For example, there's now an advisory board for the tech envoy and the Secretary General on this. And so the UN will try to do some kind of global governance. But of course, the UN has only limited supranational power. It is mainly multilateral, and the nations have a lot to say there. Now, I think this is, I mean, it's good that these efforts are ongoing, but it's not enough. Why is it not enough? Why do I think that it needs to be more supranational and truly global? Is that the problem is global. AI software goes everywhere. It doesn't know borders. So why should regulation know borders? I think we need cooperation, and we need some even if it's a very thin, we need some kind of supranational framework also. It's a moral argument. We need to avoid the risks and ethical problems that I talked about, but we also need to avoid a situation that is more or less Hobbesian, as we call in political philosophy, where the idea is that if you just leave the nation states doing their own thing, then you get a sort of brutish world that Hobbes talks about between individuals. So if we don't want that, we need some kind of coordination and supranational framework, also to ensure some form of global justice, even if it's very difficult to talk about this and to do this. We need to talk about it and do something about it. We need to think about, can it be made democratic? Because some people, like if I say like, yeah, we need some kind of global governance, they say like, yeah, but you're proposing some kind of world government and world dictatorship or something. No, I don't want world dictatorship. I want some democratic forms of global governance. But what is that? Yeah? And so it's not so easy. I don't have the final answer there, but we need to discuss this. How can we, at international and supranational level, still ensure democracy? At the moment, there is no such thing, or only indirectly through representation via the nation states. Also, dangers of neocolonialism, right? So there's a danger that the political values and goals are defined only by part of the world and not by others, or benefit only part of the world, and that some kind of new colonialism arises. Also, the balance that we always have to make between regulation and innovation, of course, also comes up in that context. But I'm very, my view is kind of constructive, think like, okay, if you really want good innovation, you need actually to ensure a sort of stable basis of regulation so that all the companies know what's going on. One problem that we have today is, even with the plans of the EU, that we still don't know, also in private sector, what is going to happen. And this is very bad. Uncertainty is not good for innovation. So it's good, I think, to have a framework that everyone knows, like these are the rules, and then innovation can actually flourish. Then, yeah, I said that about the UN. Is it a step in the right direction? I think so, but these are huge challenges that are still awaiting. And I think we need also then, from the global perspective, from the nation state, more concrete proposals how to organize global governance. And I think there's a lot of expertise in the nation states on this, so I think that needs to flow to the UN in this case, because we don't have anything else at the moment. I think also, yeah, this has to do with to how much power are nation states willing to delegate to the supranational level. I think as long as it's the case like it is now, that there is almost no power delegation, I think we will continue to have problems, not only with AI, but also with other global problems like climate change, right? Because we don't have an institution that can really deal with problems at global level. At the same time, we need to ensure it's democratic and so on. So it is, I think, a huge challenge, but I think an interesting topic to think about. And thinking about the local again, of course, cities play a very important role today in a globalized context. And also not only nations, but also cities and regions can, of course, contribute to thinking about that and contribute to providing solutions, to experimenting, to think how, yeah, also about the role of cities in ensuring justice, in trying to find values that can be shared. Cities being, of course, themselves multicultural and having some experience with this. Finally, I would like to put this in the context of the Anthropocene. So usually, global governance is needed. We need to control in that sense. But part of the problem with modern technology is also too much control, in the sense that we have completely reshaped the world, and we have, as humanity, a huge influence on the planet. And this has been expressed as Anthropocene, that humanity has become this geological force. I call it a kind of hyper-agency that has, of course, had influence on the non-human world. And so from a more ecological perspective, one has to limit power here. So then it's not so much about governance and regulation, but it's about some deeper philosophical questions about the relation between humanity and Earth, relation between humanity and the planet. And there I think we can think about what could the politics of the Earth mean. So geopolitics, but not in terms of like a strategic game between states, who has first the best AI, who has the first regulation, but more the question like who is the first to show others that a better relation to the Earth is possible. I think we already see a lot of initiatives, both at local, national level, concerning sustainability, for example. We have to think about how to make also information technologies, AI and so on, more sustainable and more friendly for climate. And there again, the different political levels can play an important role. And philosophers can help thinking about this issue about how do we relate to nature, how should we relate to nature, and what can the role of politics be in there. So AI is power in many ways, and we have to organize power in a democratic way, I think, but then the difficult question is like how to do this. And I've argued for, next to other levels, also some form of global governance, and to think about like, what is that relation of humanity to nature, and how can politics contribute to technologies, policies that that help us find a better way of dealing with nature, and of course that's always linked also with a better way of dealing with each other. More in the book, also in Spanish, as I said, and I'm looking forward to more discussion with you here. I should also announce that the more things I've said about democracy already point to my next book, which will be out in the winter, about the democracy and AI. And I'm looking forward to discuss this with you. Thank you.
¿Tenemos alguna pregunta? Por aquí. Venga, voy para allí.
Thank you so much for this insightful presentation and thought-provoking. Could you double-click a little bit more on the mechanisms that you mentioned on how to link the expertise to the institutions? How would that look like? If you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so how would that look like? So what we have now is this kind of expert councils that advise. We also have a lot of informal consultation, of course. Outside the spotlights, the politicians, of course, talk to scientists and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I see with technologies, I'm already like 25 years thinking about this, and you see with different technologies, nuclear, nanotechnology, and so on, medical technologies, you see always that in society there is suddenly a hype, there is a new technologies, oops, we don't know what to do with it. And so what we don't have is a more permanent structure rather than ad hoc ways of consultation. I think we need some kind of institutional way to have a permanent flow of information and expertise from the experts to politics, and also vice versa. Because I think the problem is that scientists are often unaware of the highly political nature of their work. And so we need that kind of dialogue, but not just ad hoc, like, oh, now we have AI, help, we have to do something, but just have some permanent structures, because we have our 19th century structures of democracy, parliament, and so on. I'm not saying that they are not totally not good anymore, but we need to think, like, how can we really bring this expertise in a transparent way, rather than now behind doors often, and in a way that then can be used for participation and deliberation by citizens. This is really, yeah, so I think some new institution is needed there, actually, in the end. And to get there, we can experiment with ways to connect citizens with experts, to connect politicians with experts, but it's definitely a permanent solution is needed.
Thank you, Mark, for the presentation. I don't know how to spell your last name, but it is as difficult as we have them in the Basque Country. So,
yeah, I have difficulties with the Basque language to pronounce. Yeah.
Okay, I'm worried about it. You said about big U.S. companies, AI. They're gonna rule the world in the next few years. So, what's your take on Europe? What is Europe gonna do? Is it gonna become irrelevant?
I think it's a very good question, and of course I don't have a final answer on this, but the tendency is for sure there. So what can we do about it? So partly what we can do about is, of course, what we do now sometimes, like EU has some regulations and court cases against them and so on. So from the legal side, we can do something. But in the end, I think it's a problem of innovation in a European context. So how can we move from the great research we have in Europe to a context where we can also innovate in the area of AI and so on? Of course, some things are happening, but you see that the US is still leading there, and that's a huge problem. Of course, European Commission and everyone is thinking about this. I don't have the magic solution there. Otherwise, I would probably go in politics. But we need to think about European sovereignty there, also in the context not only regulation but also innovation. What I can propose from my side is that we can show the rest of the world that ethics can be implemented in the development process of AI. So if we have a framework for this politically and regulatory to stimulate this, then in the end we can have a sort of more stable, politically stable, democratically stable AI. And this in the end will have influence on the rest of the world also. So I think it's a kind of partly defense, but also partly we need a constructive approach, like, okay, like maybe we need to do something here, and not just copy Silicon Valley, but trying to use our strengths, which includes the ethics, which includes a great democratic tradition. So there, I think we need a positive project also, and not just defensive and purely geopolitical.
Hi, thanks very much for your inspiring speech. Picking up from three elements that you mentioned: the good use of AI, the fight against climate change, and the good things that we can do in Europe. My name is Andoni Hidalgo. I'm coming from an organization called Climate Kick, which is depending on the European Institute for Technology, and the KIC means Knowledge and Innovation Communities. So it's working. We are a set of more than 100 actors in Europe, universities, companies, startups, etc., working with institutions and others in order to foster innovation in the fight against climate change. Now, AI, we have known it as the highest point of innovation nowadays. We're looking at it. I think everybody has the impression that it is more or less a black box, but we are wondering about how this could help us in the fight against climate change and in the fight against not linear innovation, but incremental innovation, and making a systemic transformation. But we're pushing, we're working with many, many governments across Europe in the systemic transformation, bringing politics in terms of like as a mobility, environment, but also social element. The social element of fighting against climate change is very important. Economics, of course. How can you, I mean, obviously this is a bigger debate. There's no silver bullet, but what is your take about how a good use of AI could foster this systemic transformation that is very much needed in order to fight climate change, this other global problem that you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you for that question. First of all, great that you're working on this more systemic approach, because of course, to change things, we need all kind of sectors in society. It's not just, we cannot just have only part of it. Yeah, I wrote an article, AI for climate, and it like partly also sees the problems where AI can, like through energy consumption and so on, also is not always good for climate, and so works against this kind of goals. But it can also help us by collecting and analyzing data about not only the scientific processes, but also in the end the consequences for people and societies. I think this is done too little, that we always think about climate change as a kind of scientific problem, but it's scientific and also social. And there, the analysis of a lot of data all over the world can also give us more clarity on where are the vulnerabilities created by climate change. Vulnerabilities in terms of extreme weather events, for example, but also the consequences for people. What does climate change mean in different geographical contexts? So I think AI can definitely help there. We just should see also AI not as this neutral instrument there, but also as itself something that has consequences for. So we also need to discuss the negative side of AI. But without demonizing it, because we have a lot of technologies that have environmental consequences, and we need some kind of holistic approach there, not just saying AI only, we're going to only talk about AI. I mean, this is maybe something that I also should have said. Last thing I want to say to that question is that I didn't stress it here, but we need absolutely an interdisciplinary approach there. So both across sectors, but also across disciplines to better understand this. So for example, in an article, I proposed kind of sustainability budgets, which is a very specific management and development method for software development. So that was more led by technical people and people who really work with developers. So yeah, I think also in academia we need this multidisciplinary and also in communities, different professions, different so a kind of multilateralism in that sense also. Absolutely. Thank you.
¿Más? No. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vale. Bueno, pues vamos a hacer un alto en el camino, si les parece.
Right, we're going to have a short break now to have a cup of coffee, and we can continue chatting in a more informal environment. We'll see you back here at 11:45.
Bueno, pues después de este momentito de charla y de café.
Right, well, after this coffee break, which we were all very much in need of, we're now going to have a roundtable debate entitled Society, Power and Technology. And participating in this debate, we have Ana Miren Ibáñez Zugazaga, who is the Director of Modernization at the Bilbao City Council, Joseba Lecube, CEO of the TECNE Group, which provides innovative technological solutions. We have Guillermo Otano, who works in Albon. He has a PhD in sociology from the Public University of Navarre, and he's the author of a number of different academic works on different issues such as the governance of natural resources. We also have César Said Rosales Torres, who's an expert in technology and democracy for multilateral organizations, providing support to the organizations of the private sector in order to enable them to be more responsible in the way they use AI. And to chair this debate, we have Chechu Ausin, who is the director of the philosophy department in CSIC. So the floor is all yours. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Thank you very much for being here for this session. We're going to start now the third roundtable debate. And the aim is to try to talk about and to maybe take some of the more abstract ideas that we've heard in the previous roundtables and presentations and really bring them down to earth to see what they mean in the micro world in our everyday activities. We're going to deal with the tension between innovation and regulation, and we're also going to be focusing on people, how technology policy at a social level, at the level of individuals, how it affects us. Now, earlier, we had the wonderful talk by Mark, and we were talking about technology policy. And in science philosophy, we say that artifacts are political. Artifacts are not neutral. They modify our environment, and they establish power relations and relations of authority. And this is what I'd like us to talk about now in this panel discussion. Technologies transform habits, relationships, personal relationships, and the relationships in the working world and the administration, interpersonal relationships. So we need to see how we can go a little bit further, dig a little deeper, and have a look at what's behind all of this and how this is going to affect societies and individuals. We have 4 magnificent speakers, or participants and panelists. So first of all, let's meet Ana Miren. She works at the Bilbao City Council, and she works to try to avoid technologies bringing about even more inequality or widening the gap in the field of local administration. Now, everything local, the local level has a major impact on all of this. So Ana Miren, I'll pass the floor over to you first. Thank you very much. Well, as you were saying, and as in fact many of our speakers have been saying throughout this conference, technology has many, many different benefits that we need to be able to make the most of. Technology is a tool for administrations. It's a tool. It's a tool which will enable us to improve the quality of life of our citizens and also to help us to foster economic activity in order to make us more competitive in all the different sectors that we have here in the Basque Country. So as you said as well, it's very important to be aware of the fact that technology isn't neutral. It has its biases, and it has and it poses certain risks. And in order to avoid or minimize or even eliminate these risks, in the Bilbao City Council, we're engaging in different projects. We'll just give you some idea of some of the most important ones, the ones that are linked to reducing or eliminating the digital divide that exists in society at the moment, and how, from a strategic point of view, we are trying to define a digital transformation agenda, which in its very definition takes into account sustainability, diversity and inclusion. So we'll talk about these projects. We also have the Bilbao Wi-Fi project, which has been up and running for a while now and works very intensely to try to reduce the digital divide in the different neighborhoods of the city. We'll also be talking about some other projects that are being carried out to reduce cybersecurity risks, which is another type of risk that is associated with this digital transformation, the digital transformation of society. And of course, data. We shouldn't forget the importance of data in everything that we do, and how these data open up really good opportunities for better decision making so that we can become more sustainable and we can reduce our environmental impact. So, as I said, in Bilbao last year, we approved a digital transformation agenda, the 2030 agenda. This agenda aims to improve the quality of life of citizens so that Bilbao can continue to be a smart city, a city that is attractive. It's a city based on values, and that's really important for us. For us, values are a very, very important element. And we have actually laid out a charter of values, which we've co-created with citizens themselves, and that's the basis of everything that we do. We've also created a Bilbao Data Manifesto, which is based on this charter of values written by citizens. And so based on these values, which include inclusion, diversity, sustainability, privacy, cybersecurity, these are the values. These are values are the basis of everything that we do, and we establish an ethical framework for how to manage citizens' data, which is a very, very sensitive issue. So I said we want to continue to be a smart city, an inclusive city. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And focusing on the technological side of things, we have defined a vision of what we want to be. We want to be an innovation hub. We want to be a center of advanced services. We want to be a living lab in which we can test out different technologies in the city environment. And also, we want to create, we want to train and we want to retain talent that has to do with the digital world, in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity. So this is the large-scale vision that we have established for 2030, and there are 5 goals that we have established. They're very pragmatic. The first one is to accelerate everything. The digital agenda needs to be used to accelerate the economic development of our city, because we shouldn't forget that thanks to this, we have a lot of economic activity here. And thanks to that, we are able to generate a very important social agenda as well. We do a lot in the social field in order to reduce this digital divide and be more inclusive. This is the first main objective.
The second is to be a friendlier city in which we integrate the elderly, tourists, we include safety as well. So new inclusion, which is really important in our 2030 agenda and in our definition of our city model. And the third goal is to skill people in technologies. The fourth, which is linked to sustainability, and another one which is linked to the city council itself is to be an open participatory government where we truly use tools to improve and to offer better services to our public. So that's what the digital agenda is already really about. We want a city that's based on values, where inclusion, sustainability is included and nobody's left behind. As for the digital divide, we've started up a project that actually arose because of the pandemic. It's when we became aware of the need to help people carry out paperwork, bureaucratic local paperwork. So now there's this service in these local service centers, and it's a service to help people with the paperwork, especially bureaucratic paperwork. The public love it. You empower the public, and also then they leave and they've got their paperwork done. It's a very practical goal of empowering citizens and directly reducing the digital divide. And this is one of the best valued services that we offer. The digital help point, or digital help desk, we call it. So that's what Bilbao is working on. Bilbao Wi-Fi is a very consolidated project. We've got a local, free, wireless, open wireless network. You don't need any password. Over 100,000 users use it every day, and this means we can reduce the digital divide. And in fact, pandemic meant that this is one of the services that the public most valued. It meant that despite the pandemic, people could carry on working and their children could carry on studying thanks to this free wireless service. Another project we're working on, I don't know how we're doing for time, but this is cybersecurity for the public. There's two sides to this project, a technological one to identify and block malware in people's devices. We've seen that there are certain devices that are being used by the population, and they don't know that there are cybersecurity risks in the use of these devices. So we've created this new service that allows us to tell the public that they've got malware in their device, so that they know that and they can take the necessary steps to reduce these risks. That's one side of this project, but there's another side that's also related to empowerment or upskilling. We don't need everybody to be cybersecurity experts. That would be impossible, but we do need for the public to be aware of cybersecurity risks, so that malware, which is normally actually used by the weakest link, which are all of us in reality, we're all the weakest link, so that these cyber hackers can see that our public are protected, and that we're going to make life complicated for these hackers. This is being done by upskilling our local population cybersecurity skills. The issue of data. Data is so important, as we said initially, for decision making, efficient, important decision making. We need to make sure that all our decisions are data-based, not intuition-based. And with this plan, we can do that a lot more efficiently. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ana Miren. This is a better microphone for listening. I was very interested in what you said about digital skills, because the things that we're talking about are things that affect a group. But as individuals, we need to have knowledge. Digital literacy is really important for this. Some people have called this the need for a new digital enlightenment. So we need to be enlightened digitally, because we've got to play our role in the public space, and we need digital literacy for that. You also spoke about how important it is to recognize digital connectivity and cybersecurity as public goods, public assets. We should really be aware of that. And this morning we heard news that the first leading Chinese bank has been hacked. goodness me, you can imagine they've probably got all kinds of firewalls at this bank in China, and yet we don't have that. And I'm sure it would be a lot easier to hack us. You can imagine the economic repercussions of that in China. It's really interesting, the ideas that you've explained to us. We'll ask you some questions later, but let's now pass the mic over to Joseba so he can talk to us from the viewpoint of a Basque company. I know you've got businesses in Mexico, but can you tell us a little bit about how you view this debate that we're immersed in? Thank you so much, Gabe. Thanks, Mikel and Juanjo.
Ondo ikusten dugu, ekitea alako gobernu bat sartzen dala gaia hauetaz eta pozik, ekiteaz. Ni ez naz politikoa, ni teknologa naiz, eta etzingo gehiago enpresari buruz eta teknologiari buruz. Oindala, 11 hilabete eman zan berri bat, eta enpresa berri bat sortu zan, IA munduan, adimen artifizialen munduan, ez genuela ezautzen. Eta izango da Google bezalako enpresa handi bat.
I want to talk about how we see that. My way of seeing it, what actually is around the corner now is far greater than the Industrial Revolution. I wasn't alive then, but I've read about it. What was huge was the Internet revolution. We feel so those of us that are interested in these subjects, and there are big challenges now. There are challenges regarding how to help the public and channel everything that's happening. Challenges are huge. We see huge changes out there. And we need, as members of the public, to understand where we're heading and what the impact of this technology is going to be. So my first thought is that this revolution is going to be even greater. Why do I say that? Internet, which is kind of our benchmark, is based on a technology. I'm not going to be too technical here. Was involved in the computation of TCP/IP packets. But in the end, what it did was democratize communication. And from then onwards, all sorts of things cropped up. We can access our banks remotely. We can read a digital newspaper. We can access virtually all the information around that. We can do so many things that we actually couldn't do in the past. And so this technology, when it gets cheaper, which is what happened with internet, its consumption goes up exponentially. So that's a basic law of economics. And that's what happened. In the case of AI, something similar is going on. To simplify things and to give you, what is AI? If internet is communication, what's AI? I'd say AI, and this is a personal viewpoint from one prism. AI for me is prediction. It gives you the ability to predict. This morning, before I came here, I opened the weather app on my phone and I thought, what's Bilbao going to be like this morning? I didn't realize it. I'd imagine it was going to rain, but it said, all this probability of water. So I grabbed my umbrella. And then I asked Google, is there a car park next to BBK Cuna? No, you've got to go to Mirabilia or some hotel up on the top of the hill or whatever. But actually, Google told me where I could park nearby. And then then I thought, okay, I'm going to open my AI app. And I said, oh, this morning we're going to be having a panel session talking about technology, talking about politics and power. And I asked it, I'm taking part in a panel session on society, power, and technology. What do you think I should say? What should be my viewpoint? I thought I'll ask him. You know ChatGPT, don't you? Yes. It's the following. Taking part in a panel session on society, power, and technology is a great opportunity to explore the intersection of these different fields. In the digital era, technology has become a facilitator of power. It shapes political structures and societies. It democratizes information and empowers the public. It can also lead to new forms of inequality and control. So got it right there. To guarantee that technology serves as a common good, a robust ethical framework is necessary, as well as effective regulation and the governance by society of emerging technologies. So it's not bad, this ChatGPT. And you can support this thesis, such as one, development. There are 5 items. All of this I accessed in just a couple of seconds. Democratization and access to information. Surveillance and privacy, AI and ethics, digital divide and inequality. How a lack of access to technology can affect safety, cultural issues and economics. You all know that better than I do. 5, governance and technology regulation. This thesis provides you with a basis for an enriching debate on the impact of AI on society and power. So great, that's it. That's it. I don't need to say anything more than that, do I really? It's today, 2023, today. The first versions of this ChatGPT. These are the first initial versions. So if the thesis is that the impact that this is going to have on the future is like saying to a youngster today, oh yeah, when internet was starting out, we didn't know where we were heading. And now nobody questions what's happened. This is going to be the same, but even bigger. And what's more, internet affects communication. AI affects prediction. And it's really important because decisions are actually prediction plus judgment. So it's really, really important of our what we do as a company every single day. As a company, as a business, as a government, and as members of the public, as citizens, we can have AI stuck to us, taking decisions all day, whether we like it or not, for good and for bad. That's what's going to happen. I'm sure for good, because actually I think it is going to be for good. But that's the situation we're facing. Something that impacts human beings down to their core. Not even a year's gone by. It's incredible. Bill Gates, if you don't believe me, that's fair enough. But Bill Gates said, when the owners of OpenAI come to my house in August 22, they showed me how this can actually pass the SAT exam, the American SAT exam, and then the best students that are out there, the American bar exam as well. And I thought, but what was most impacting Bill Gates was, I'll give you a question. If you ask it a question that's not technical, how would you write a letter for a father who's got a very, very sick son? I don't know if you've ever read it. It's published in the internet. Read it. The whole group was gobsmacked. It's not just something that'll help us develop, prepare conferences, make summaries, do translations, write poetry, create images, create music. AI does something that we thought it wouldn't be able to do not so long ago, which is to create. AI can create. We thought that was something that only humans could do. AI does rapid calculations, plays chess very well, does great summaries, but now it's invading, in inverted commas, those areas that we thought only were human. So it's already invaded us. That's going to be a problem. Or not. AI is going to help us create. That's positive. Yes, of course. Everything that's been created with this tool, with us, together with humans, we don't know. We actually don't know how far it can go. It's beyond our imagination. So when I think about this, about where we're heading, I think we're already there, almost. We're already immersed in a revolution far greater than any previous ones, and with implications, many of which you've commented upon and will carry on commenting on, with very, very important implications is what I wanted to say. So I'll leave it there. Great, that was very interesting what you said, because this is what I was trying to refer to initially. AI is transforming the way we comprehend things. There are some people who are already working on AI systems for jury sessions in courts. So it'll help the jurors analyze ethical questions that are being raised in a trial by a jury. So then we should also be asking ourselves whether AI replaces or accompanies humans. That's another debate, because many companies are thinking about how it would replace humans. And that's perhaps the fear, the labor market fear, and how many AI applications can actually replace us. This is a very serious issue. We can talk about that later. What is our relationship? The next challenge that we have as societies is how we're going to coexist with systems where intelligence is something that is just for humans, but there are other intelligences that can collaborate with us. It's what you called multi-agent intelligences or multi-stakeholder intelligences. And how do we articulate that? That's a big challenge for our era. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Guillermo now, because AI and technology, there's things behind it. It's not done in a vacuum. People talk about clouds. That was a great idea, a great imagination, whoever spoke about clouds, because you don't think it's anything that's going to have an impact on the environment. It's something just floats about there. But Marco spoke about how there's something else which also needs to be considered in this digitalization shaping of the world, which is our relationship with nature and the animal world, and everything that implies regarding energy consumption, natural resource consumption. Sometimes AI systems developed without actually thinking, just going straight into it without thinking about sustainable competitiveness, and how this is a challenge. But I'm going to hand the floor over to Guillermo, because he's going to talk about what's behind technology. Thanks, Chichu. I've come here representing Albon, which is an NGO of international cooperation representing the Jesuits. We have offices here and in Navarra, and we work with many countries in Latin America, Central Africa, and India who produce minerals. So 10 years ago, when AI wasn't as present in our lives as it is today, people spoke about other issues. They were talking about mobile phones, 3G. 3G was cutting edge at that time. And we started speaking about minerals in situations of conflict and how we could promote through a public campaign the responsible consumption of minerals from zones in conflict. What's the problem? Well, it's something that has been defined by the UN since the beginning of the year 2000, and it refers to minerals that are mined in high-risk areas or conflict areas. tungsten, gold. These are minerals that you get in Colombia, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Myanmar. These are conflict areas. They may be interstate conflicts, but they're basically areas where there's very little state institutions, where there are armed groups, insurgents, organized crime, and to a certain extent, the small-scale mining of these minerals in sort of border areas can end up financing the action of these groups, just like any other illegal economy. You could talk about the supply chains and power relations in these contexts, but I'm going to talk about how we in the Basque Country launched this campaign to make the public aware and to try to seek solutions to this problem, which is really complex. We did it through a campaign called Conflict-Free Technology, based on a model which is what we call the 3C model of social innovation, based on a Manchester professor. These 3 Cs are 3 change processes at 3 different levels. We've got a C, consciousness. We need to make the public conscious of some of the problems that are related to technology. They need to become aware of that, because people shouldn't just be thinking of themselves as passive consumers. They go out and buy a mobile phone with the only criteria of it being cheap or the technical characteristics of mobile, but rather how we can question the way we choose. As Mark said this morning, what other variables are out there? Do we just seek criteria and technical criteria, the technical or economic, or are there other things? What about what that manufacturing company does in its supply chain? This sort of consciousness coming, the first is the consciousness, the awareness of how these minerals in conflict get into the supply chain and how companies and governments are involved in this. The idea was to try to promote our power within, try to get people to realize that we do have a power within. And we did that via educational materials in schools, articles in the press, on the television. We actually appeared on a program called Salvados, which over 2 million people saw. It was about mining these minerals and how that works. And then there's, in addition to this consciousness or awareness, this should actually make us think and need to be linked to some kind of action, because otherwise you just become indifferent. That's no good. You can say, oh, this problem's too complicated. So you need to put some solutions on the table. And that's when we talk about conciliation, how to reconcile specific individual interests with other interests. And the idea is to pinpoint power relations that we have with other groups, with other people. We work. We, of course, offer the possibility of getting involved in online activism, writing to your MEP, signature collection for petitions, and we also work with educational centres, encouraging them to deal with this issue in their syllabuses. Also with companies, there's a project called Mobile Phones for the Planet, and in this project we work with companies to inform them of this problem and to make available to them the possibility of recycling the devices that they use in the company. And so we work alongside another company that works in recycling electronic waste. We sell them, we then reinvest the money that we get from this in programs in these conflict zones. We've got another initiative with city councils about ethical public procurement. So what sort of clauses could be included in public procurement so that there are ethical criteria when you award a contract to a supplier? We help them look into what sort of clauses can be included, what sort of requirements can be asked from a company so that they manage these risks in their value chains, in their supply chains. And beyond these initiatives at a level of civil society and companies, the final part of the way we do is to ask for a European act on minerals in conflict zones. Because in 2014, when we started this campaign, in 2010, actually, an act had already been passed in the US on this issue. It's an act which requires that American companies that are listed on the stock exchange to state that the products they produce are conflict-free. At that time, this law was very cutting edge, and Europe tried to do something similar, but also learning a little bit from the mistakes that had cropped up in this legislative process. If I'm not wrong, this law actually isn't being fully applied in the US. Part of it was repealed and there's been problems. But in Europe, we tried to learn, to try to avoid this, to get this legislation passed. And to do so, a coalition of NGOs was formed, European-wide, with also collaboration of NGOs from the Congo, which is one of the producing countries. The legislation started its passage through Parliament in 2014, and currently 2023, after many hiccups, ups and downs, we're at the situation of ex post reviewing. This act, as it stands today, will actually force these direct importers of these minerals, and there are around 600,000 of them in Europe, around 25 to 30 in Spain. These are companies that import these minerals, and they are obliged to check their origin and the conditions in which they've been mined, and they have to certify via an audit the different conditions, the different where they're going to end up, so that the downstream companies, many of them which are technologies, those that make chips, that make batteries, that assemble mobiles, so that they know the origin of the minerals and apply the life license voluntarily.
So the idea is that the third C is cooperation, which aims to identify the political decision makers with the power to change things, change a specific aspect of the reality, of the political reality. And all of this work at these different levels, we wouldn't have been able to do it, of course, on our own. So we needed to have cooperation, and we had this coalition of NGOs, each of them doing their bit. There were over 150 organizations working at some point, at least in the project. And this has enabled us to generate change. There's a much greater awareness today with initiatives such as, for example, mobile phones for the Earth. We have established collaboration agreements with more than 30 companies. We have managed to actually get some income from that, which has enabled us to initiate other projects, working with people in Colombia, in the Congo, etc. So there are initiatives that we continue to promote today. And after this last day and a half of talking about these issues, I think I've realized that we need to actually broaden the issues that we focus on in our campaign, because there's many issues that go beyond just the hardware and the device itself that need to be questioned from an ethical perspective. We need to think about where we're going with them and how we can make sure that all of these innovations, which are unstoppable, there's no way, there's no turning back, but we need to be able to use them in order to build a global citizenship and work towards the common good. Thank you very much, Guillermo. The issues that you have brought up are closely linked to the theme of the encounters that we held last year, which was about green digital and the idea of sustainability in the digital world, because all these technologies have an impact on the environment. We say they're up in the clouds, but they're not actually up in the clouds. They're held in huge computer systems that are actually here on Earth and use up a lot of electricity. I remember that someone came from the European Parliament and they were trying to legislate for this. We still haven't managed to do that. Because there needs to be legislation about, making sure that mobile phones actually get fixed rather than just thrown away and you get a new one. I mean, we've all got a box somewhere in our house with old mobile phones in, and they all have lots of components and materials that could be used and aren't used. So this is something that's having a major environmental impact. It also has to do with supply chains and a geopolitical issue, which has to do with the control of these essential minerals, strategic minerals, which are behind many of the conflicts that are being generated in impoverished countries or low-income countries, mainly in Africa and in Western Africa. Many of the conflicts have to do with control of the mining interests there. And when we talk here about digital sovereignty, which we have talked about over the course of these events, this has to do with the reopening of the mining industry as another strategic industry, because of course, this poses a lot of environmental problems as well. So we often talk about the ethical issues, environmental issues, social issues, but we always do that from our Eurocentric perspective. The perspective of a developed society, but the immense majority of the world that is actually affected by the development of technology and artificial intelligence don't have a voice. This part of the world doesn't have a voice in this debate. So I think it's in time to really carry out these analyses from a different perspective. And to talk about that, let's pass the floor to César. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here sharing this space with you and my fellow panelists. I wanted to go back to what Joseba said. He said that what's coming is huge. I think that's been widely recognized, that we are on the verge of a revolution. But I think we need to understand a lot more about the specific dynamics of this revolution that's coming from a technical point of view, a social technical point of view as well. But I think there's a general understanding and acceptance of the fact that these dynamics are absolutely vital and are going to change the way in which we interact with systems. And I think that as part of that understanding and recognition of this revolution, we need to be very honest, and we shouldn't be self-complacent. We should be more critical in the way in which we understand them. I remember I was having a conversation with someone just before I started with this panel debate started. An illustrious Mexican, Manuel Moreno Ilustras, said, "We are worse, but we're better. Because before we were okay, but it was a lie, but now we are bad, but that's actually the truth." So this is something I just wanted to mention. I'm not trying to say that we are actually badly off in this situation, but I'm talking about here the importance of honestly recognizing the dynamics that are at play. And if you think that everything's going well, then you need to ask yourself, well, what's going on here? From the perspective of the ecosystem in which I work, which is the Caribbean and Latin America, and I help startups and I work with venture capital funds to try to make use of all of this knowledge, and so that they can incorporate this knowledge and this expertise in their business models and their companies. And when you're doing that, it's really important to understand what the dynamic is exactly and how those dynamics actually work on the ground, in situ, in the projects that are being carried out in city councils, in different projects, and in the private sector as well. What do these dynamics look like especially in a region of the world where there isn't a lot of regulation. There are some tendencies. There are countries that are a little bit further ahead than others. Chile and Brazil are two of them. They're making quite a lot of headway with this regulation, with regulating these issues. But if we have to look at these regulations, and a lot of them are inspired by Europe, and I think Europe has a major impact on Latin America, because what we're doing here, they are just copying it and pasting it in Latin America. So we need to be really careful with that. We need to be careful because we need to make sure that we understand the dynamics at play. One of the issues, well, there are three issues I want to talk about: global governance, institutions, and organizations. So in the level of global governance, we've seen over recent weeks a lot of headway has been made. We've had executive orders, we've had legislative advance, we've had the code of ethics of the G7, for example, all of these different things. We have these different declarations. There has been a lot of headway made, but I think we need to start to break it down into in little pieces and to understand how it's somehow incompatible with certain regions. So, for example, the fact that we are establishing certain legislative frameworks which have been promoted by technological companies, high-tech companies with their own vested interests. Basically, they're tracing out what the playing field is, but who's being excluded from that playing field? And how do we distribute power amongst them? So there's a first element of this governance, and it's important to recognize it. And there's some really interesting studies as well being carried out about the regulatory perspective of both data and AI. There are two papers, at least, which I think is really important. One is on the effect of AI on data risk and in attitudes of people when they're deciding whether or not to share their data. If there's danger there, they don't. In Latin America, things are quite different because we don't have this risk-based approach. Then we actually go to the other extreme. He says, yeah, here you go, here's my data, no problem. Here you go, you want some more, but we need to be careful. So what would be a good balance there? And then there's another issue, and in fact, a research is being carried out in the field of recruitment and personnel selection, and how AI affects discrimination. Well, this is a study that was carried out back in the 1970s, but this type of discrimination is repeated time and time again. So you establish a parameter of 80%, 80% for in the Economic Employment Opportunities Commission in the United States does this. You say, okay, well, we just comply with 80%, but what happens to the other 20%? So the regulatory aspect is important, but what we're interested in is that 20% that falls outside, that falls through the gap. And in Latin America, because we still don't have that regulatory obligation, it's not a binding obligation, we want to see how we can actually reach out to that 20%, because we're talking about a region that has a lot of this inequality. The inequality is growing. The UN Development Programme, I mean, you can just sum up the development of Latin America very simply. We were doing well, then we stagnated, and now things are going worse. So when things were going well, in the first decade of the new millennium, things were going well. Inequality had been reduced by half almost, and we hoped that by 2016 the middle class would be the majority class in the region, but that didn't happen. There was a stagnation there in about 2012. There was a stagnation, things stopped, and then with the pandemic, after the pandemic, well, even that, we don't know what the effect of the pandemic has been. In fact, we're studying it at the moment, but it's probably we've gone downhill since then. I think these reflections are really important in order to understand what kind of mechanisms and vehicles work in that region in order to promote innovation and to tackle these social problems. Because at the end of the day, what we want, the long-term goal, which we were talking about at the beginning of today, is shared prosperity. How can we reach consensus? How can we make sure that our societies continue to work and stop separating, becoming separate and going their own separate ways? And to do that, one of the mechanisms we can use are economic mechanisms, economic vectors. So we have state companies, then multinational companies. Now we have startups, and how we need to look at how startups can actually contribute to improving society. Startups are often described as laser-focused organizations. They're organizations with a real focus, very sharp focus. I know that there's a study. I haven't read it, but I know it exists, and I know what the idea is. And that's the fluid or liquid modernity by Zygmunt Bauman. And one of the things that Bauman says, because I've read part of it, but not the entire paper or the entire book, he says that the problem on focusing on resolving just one thing is that you can actually have the opposite effect without meaning to. And we've seen this, for example, in financial inclusion, with financial inclusion solutions that say, okay, we're going to try to include people who couldn't get loans before. They didn't have good credit rating, so we're going to find proxies. So we can just a different way to see that you're not at risk. You're not a risk for the bank. But there's other problems there, because we just have parameters to define who is a risky prospect and who isn't. And if you just change the parameters, but in fact, you just create more exclusion. Human Rights Watch has an interesting study that was carried out in Jordan. So if you want to have a look at that, for example, you can get more information out of that. So we need to see whether these vehicles are ethical and how they're being funded. What's happening? And with regard to venture capital funds, which are behind the funding of some of these entities, we've seen in the last year, more or less, at the end of 2021 and just prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, just before that, we saw that there was an important problem with inflation. Money is more and more expensive. And has it since more or less the end of 2022? I think it was when we had a contraction in the offer of demand that was available for startups. So funding was basically dried up for startups. What does that mean? Well, it seems that the startups can't find money, but it's also a problem with the funds, because what's their supply? What can they offer as a funding mechanism as opposed to other models? Because if money is more expensive, then that means there's less risk for investors. So you have to do better due diligence. And now what is funded you have to be more careful about what you're going to finance. We have to be much more careful, because for the venture capital funds as well. And I'm talking about a region in which there isn't regulation. We talk about Latin America, of course. We've got to have a lot of carrots and sticks there. We play around a lot with the carrots and sticks. We have to play around about how we can align people's interests so that we can all go in the same direction. That's what we do. And that's what we're trying to do, at least. These are the questions that we're asking ourselves. There are many more, of course, that are all very interesting. But I think it's really interesting to think about knowledge-based organizations. So someone arrives, they have knowledge, and then they go away again. But that's not good, because what we need increasingly, I think people were talking about knowledge communities as well earlier. It's important to see how we can actually make sure that all this knowledge that we have remains. So, thank you very much. That's all from me. Wow, we've had 4 very interesting presentations there. I was going to ask you another question before we start, but I think we're just going to open up the floor, the session to the floor now for Q&A. It's interesting to see how you've all talked about acceleration, how this is unstoppable, that these are disruptive technologies that are radically transforming our reality, our relationship with each other, the way we live with each other. My question is is the speed right? I mean, should we not try to, I don't know, make sure that the three transitions that we're going through go at the same pace? We have socio and health transformation. We're living in societies in which we're all living longer. In the Basque Country, in Bilbao at least, we also have energy transition, environmental transition, which has to do with raw materials. And then we have the digital transition. Now, these three transitions are going at different paces at the moment, and this may bring about quite a lot of problems and a lot of tension. So I don't know how you can approach that from your different areas. I don't know if you want to answer that question, or should we just open up the floor to questions? Does anybody want to ask any questions, by the way? Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your presentations. Very complimentary, I think, and you've approached the whole issue from a very holistic way. I had a comment for each panelist, and it's difficult to just boil it down to one comment. So let me start with Anne. You're talking about the digital transition here in Bilbao. Now, you've talked about a lot of incentives, areas in which the administration has tried to promote open government, e-government in quite a top-down approach, but maybe we need a bottom-up approach as well. So what are the co-design initiatives that exist that include citizens? So, for example, in the Basque Country, we have Irikia, which is kind of like an electronic governance system, but it's been a total failure in terms of participation and engagement and the volume of initiatives that have come out of it for a number of different problems. And I don't know how you interpret that in Bilbao from a local level, and how you can get towards more bottom-up initiatives. Now, what Joseba was saying, that we're at the dawn of a new era. I totally agree. But I would also like to just qualify that, because we have this generational egocentrism, because each generation has always said, we're on the dawn of a new era. And I think there's quite a lot of evidence to say that we actually are now. But I think something that contributes to that is that in society at the moment, we see there's a lot of impoverishment in terms of different alternatives. So we have this new technological developments. It's very complex, but at a leisure level, at least, it just seems to be a rehash of what happened last century. So I don't know, perhaps we need to align ourselves better with this vision in order to talk about a real paradigm shift. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just what I thought of when you were talking. Now, the work that Guillermo mentioned was absolutely fantastic, really impressive. Looking at the production of materials for constructing hardware, I'd never heard anything like it before. It's really impressive. But I don't know what you think about limits with regard to the black market, for example, which happens in the trading of these minerals. Because there is regulation, yes, in Europe and United States, but there's a back market as well. It is probably hampers even community building in your regions, because even though it's illegal, I mean, there are many legal mining initiatives, but in the benefits and the profits go to the first world, and the local communities don't see even a cent of the profit. So I just wanted you to talk about that a little bit. And then finally, I'd like to say congratulations to César. I know that in Latin America, there are a lot of problems. And you've got the old social dilemmas have reared their ugly heads again as well in that particular region of the world. But I would like to know, if we're talking about a region in which we've seen, for example, Chile, where there was new interoperability models, the participatory budgets came out of Latin America, and they redefined the social part of digital governance. So Latin America has a huge potential, I believe, for social innovation. And often people don't take much notice of it, and I think we should lever that a lot more. I know they have structural problems. There are a lot of structural problems, but perhaps we could use that to construct a new framework for the digital world. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. It's interesting to see different takes on things. And we don't always share your views, but it's really interesting always to hear them. Now, in Bilbao, what we've done is we've shone a spotlight on the strategic model that we're managing in a systematically way through our 2030 agenda, in which participation and engagement is part of the ultimate aim. Because in governance, it's really important to co-create with citizens. And in fact, many of the projects that we've talked about in those projects, citizens have participated and co-created them. For example, in the Bilbao Data Manifesto that I mentioned earlier, we've carried out a process of co-creation with private companies, with citizens, with different groups who have participated in this co-creation process to co-create this document, this manifesto, which regulates the ethical framework of everything that's done in the city in relation to data. So we incorporate citizens in that process of co-creation. That's just one example. In the cybersecurity project that we talked about before, that process was co-created with citizens. Why? Well, in order to hear their voices, hear their opinions, and in fact, their opinions have been integrated into the design of the project. We've we talked to different citizen groups, especially the citizen groups that were the most vulnerable ones. Older people, older adults, due to the fact that they're not particularly technology savvy. That was one group, but also young people, because they tend to use the digital world more. So we've integrated the viewpoints of these groups, and we've done it together. And we're now finishing this project with an application that is going to improve the digital presence of all citizens. And we've done it with citizens, integrating them right from the very beginning. And in relation to the e-administration, we're continuing to work on that to try to improve it through a number of different projects. And we're working tirelessly to improve it, to provide new services, and to improve the services we already provide to citizens. So just to carry on from what Ana Miren was saying, and then I'll answer your question a bit later on. There are examples that I think are going to be really important. You've talked about citizen engagement. Xavier also talked about it yesterday. Imagine what generative AI can do in relation to citizen engagement. So, for example, first of all, you have to co-create, and we can co-create. We can do that with generative AI. We have to explain what it is. Because why are we going to vote for something if we don't understand what it is? And sometimes you have to explain the project, and generative AI can clear up any doubts, any questions that citizens might have in a very customized way. I mean, that's fantastic. That's going to really help. And we're starting to do that. So in this very specific issue, the idea of top-down and bottom-up, in that area, we're going to see many, many projects in the future, and we're going to see a substantial improvement in the level of co-participation and co-creation, because this is going to just make the whole wave much bigger. Because if you want to ask a question, right, well, what's going to happen? What's this going to be like? You don't actually have to go and ring somebody up. You have a generative AI tool that can answer all these questions for you. And I think there's fantastic scope for improvement there. Now, to answer your question, you were talking about our sort of generational bias, maybe. People say, yeah, things are changing really quickly. Yes, and everything's going quicker and quicker and quicker. because the Industrial Revolution, when was it? I don't know, a long time ago. The computing, it was in the 50s, right? The computing revolution. And internet was just 25 years ago. In fact, our generation, I don't know, you may be younger, but our generation has lived through 2 revolutions already. We saw the birth of the internet. And we're going to go through the next revolution. So I don't think many generations have lived through 2 generations. I don't know if we'll see a 3rd one. You never know. We might do. I don't know. I think some other technology is bound to come up in the future. Maybe we'll see 3. But it's not a case of appropriating this revolution. I mean, we've already had our revolution, so it's not like we want our revolution for our generation. We've already had one. And then to answer your question about what things can be improved. Well, I think, social well-being and living better. I'm just going to come down to just a very practical level now. We all want to work less, but be as productive, right? That's what we all want. Now, I remember that my father used to work on Saturdays. And I was like, why are you going to work on Saturdays? He used to work on Saturdays, and when I said I was only going to work for 5 days, he was quite freaked out. But I mean, 5 days, why not 4 days only? Why not have Fridays off as well? Well, and I think that the new technologies are going to make us, it's going to make us so productive in some areas in a natural. I mean, Mark was talking earlier about software development through AI. I mean, I don't know if someone is going to develop an AI machine that's going to develop applications. I don't know, maybe in some years. You've got an AI that's going to give you some ideas, and in just 5 minutes, you've created an app and it's published in Google, and that might happen. I don't know how long it's going to happen. I hope we have time to adapt to it or die in the attempt. So instead of doing something that takes so long, we're going to do the same thing, but in a much shorter space of time. So we'll be much more productive using this technology. I have no doubt that we're going to have much greater well-being, many more hours of leisure time, because we're going to do so much more with all of this. So these are just practical examples of what's happening. That's the positive side of things. Obviously, we have to see the negative side of things as well. We can't. It might reduce the number of jobs, but we're very creative, aren't we? So I'm sure we'll sort something out.
Relating to the issue of illicit economy in mining areas and the role of these regulations that are outside these territories, how a European regulation can have an impact beyond Europe in this context. When I said that we were going to try to avoid some of the mistakes made in the case of the US, which forced all those companies that were listed on the stock exchange, that includes all of them, the production companies, the technology companies, the mining companies, and the consumers, to certify their products as conflict-free. And so when the companies were uncertain about the components and the minerals that they contained, and also coinciding with the approval of this law in the US, the Congo government stopped trading minerals for 6 months. There are different narratives surrounding why this happened. Some say that the government was trying to certify mines and get rid of the armed groups there and certify that there were mines where there was no child slavery. Another narrative is that the companies were actually getting supplies from other countries where there wasn't the risk of harm to their reputation of using conflict minerals for the production of their products. they try to avoid this in the case of the European regulation. So instead of having a certification of product, they asked companies to claim individual responsibility for their supply chains and complying with this policy of avoiding purchasing minerals from conflict areas. This policy was shared with suppliers, and the idea was to reduce risks in the supply chain. In the past, they didn't have the obligation of knowing their supply chain downstream. They just knew their immediate suppliers. If you manufacture a product that has a battery, well, you need to know what the battery manufacturer does. You know, you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 producers, but you didn't have to know downstream. You didn't have to be aware of anything that's downstream. But with this European legislation, you had to certify origins, and the cascade of responsibilities went down through the supply chain. So there are around 500 European companies that are affected by this regulation. What's really important now is that what sort of effect this has had at the mine level, the mine itself. We're now seeing this in Alabo, and we haven't published any reports on this yet, but just a few weeks ago, Greenpeace, a Belgian organization that actually maps mines together with EURAC, which is the European NGO network for Central Africa, published a report on the impact of the regulation on the ground. There's been some progress, and especially those mines that are in East, in the case of tungsten and gold mines. There's still some cases of illicit mines. Minerals are extracted, but the advantage of gold, for example, is if you try to traffic with it just a small amount of money, you get a huge amount of a small amount of mineral, you get a huge amount of money. So there are still problems with this. To avoid the risk of disengagement, what we want is that all those companies, once they've identified that their minerals could come from these areas, not to leave the area, because if they actually leave the area, they actually harm that population. Because if you're talking about artisanal mining, you're talking about areas where there's a great deal of poverty, where people live, survive on what they can mine. It's like an artisanal activity, as its name suggests. So with these regulations, of what's happening is that many industrial schemes or certification mechanisms are being created for these 4 minerals and for other minerals that aren't in this, aren't covered by this legislation, such as cobalt and copper, but that are also needed for example, energy transition. So these new industrial schemes or certification channels. But if it's not worked with mining populations, local populations, so that they can understand pricing mechanisms, what may well end up happening is some kind of an imposition. You know, so what we NGOs are fighting for is for the EU to have some kind of cooperation and funding mechanism to fund projects that help these groups of miners, local artisanal miners, to take part in these traceability systems so that they have a greater power to make their interests heard. It's the European Partnership for Responsible Mining, which is a public-private association, initially had 20 million euros of funding, so that precisely NGOs, together with companies and local governments, can work on projects, mining projects together. So it's a learning curve, of course it is, and I'm hoping that the learnings from this regulation will help for other regulations, other directives related to sustainability. That includes mining as a risk sector, the European regulation on electronic supplies, And in other sectors as well, there's a European directive on imported deforestation products. That's where we're heading. And the role of Europe is pioneering in these kinds of legislations. Sorry, I was just listening to what you had to say. It's very interesting. On the social side of digital governance and these opportunities in the region, I think you're right that there's a great deal of potential in this vision and in trying to include different approaches, perhaps because of the ecosystem where I work. I haven't seen that. I know there's more movements in Uruguay, for example. I'm not sure if it's a declaration, but it's more of a social way of seeing things to carry on progressing in the area of governance and specifically in AI, if I'm not wrong. But what I think is important is something that's also related to productivity that Joseba spoke about, which is that it all sounds easy to reach the productivity, increased productivity, and that we all benefit from it for social welfare. But it requires a series of institutions to permit that. And that's where I think the powers to, it's an opportunity for powers to counterbalance there, to sort of counterbalance this wave that maybe doesn't allow this to happen. What I mean by that is the region, from a Latin America and viewpoint, which has this colonial approach, this dynamic of oppression, exclusion, could perhaps put on the table a major agenda to face up to anything that might harm in this field. And at the same time, it's a really interesting mechanism what cities can do. At a city level, as you actually said, participatory budgets, etc. How many things can be done by cities? And I think this is a call to Latin American and European cities to be more proactive in their role and be real participative and representative. And it's really difficult to achieve that. But I think progress can be made in New York, for example. Recently, some great progress was made in that sense. So I think potential's there. We're only right at the very beginning of this, and there's still a lot to be done. Are there any further questions? In Latin America, there's a movement called Tierra Común, which uses a little bit the idea of non-aligned countries. It's a movement that is backed by those countries that aren't leaders in technology development, nor are they aligned with autocratic models such as China and Russia. The idea is to take a different approach, read differently technologies, read technology in a different way than from the colonial viewpoint. Here, what they're claiming is this idea of technology that's aligned with human rights. It's an interesting thing. When you spoke about participatory budgets, I just wanted to share with you that one of these participatory budgets that was proposed by the public was the implementation of wireless connection in parks, improve connectivity of wireless in parks, basically those areas where that hadn't actually occurred. This is an example of participatory budgets which are very, very via AI. In general, via AI. In general, technically, normally AI doesn't predict the future. It actually predicts the past. Normally, unless you use a model that has causal models that uses data, including a time window. The majority of them actually predict the past. This is important because now that we're talking about the city council, when you talk about data and intuition, you need to be a little bit cautious, because I don't know if you know about the tool to predict gender violence in the Basque Country. It's a tool consisting of 20 questions. The first question is whether the person is from abroad or not. So you can imagine how badly that works. Because what you're doing is representing measurable knowledge, and what isn't measurable is rejected. If you've got time to read it, there's a chapter in a book by Coeckelbergh which says that information that isn't codable is left outside. So if you can't measure something and you can't proceed by an algorithm, excludes, for example, support networks. It excludes people's attitudes, and this gives all sorts of problems in the UK when there's an algorithmic management of city councils, when it talks about assisting people. But moving on to ChatGPT, I'd like to say how ChatGPT recognizes knowledge that's sufficient for what we actually want to do with it. What ChatGPT is measure proximity between words in a sentence in relation to other proximity between words in other sentences, and what it does then is synthesize text. It's a bit like when you join the dots when you're little and you end up actually drawing a dinosaur, for example, on a join the dot books. So if you've got lots and lots of dots, it'll look more like a dinosaur. But if there aren't very many dots and they're far away, it probably won't look like a dinosaur. That's what ChatGPT does. So it depends how you ask. And it depends whether there are lots of examples of people that have written in similar terms. You'll find a response or not, or it'll invent it. The only way of knowing that is if you actually know something about the subject before you ask ChatGPT. There's no other way of validating it. It's really interesting. And as a programmer, and I've learned to program before ChatGPT, I can review the code, I can test the code. But when I ask it to summarize, a famous book can be actual summarized very well, but an article that hardly anybody has ever quoted will be very badly summarized. So be careful. Be careful. You need to understand how ChatGPT works and how AI uses these things, because AI works in the following way. It works by trial and error. What it's doing is it's validating things via its visual currents of images or text. It doesn't actually know about anything. What it is it's drawing, it's connecting these dots in different dimensions. We can't see that, and it just processes those dots when they connect. It's really, really important to know that, because technology for is to summarize the world. Chomsky's got a very critical article which says, please don't limit what we believe knowledge of science to be to just ChatGPT. So you need to know how it works. What I'm saying, can we go quicker, or does it take more time to review what ChatGPT produces and checking it as a lecturer? If anybody's got an idea about how we can go about that, I'm more than happy to accept that idea. You know, what happens to those people that still don't know how to program, for example? What happens to those people that are only studying sociology? How can they make use of this? How can they criticize it? How can these people supervise the output of chat boxes? You can read an article by Ana Valdivia about gender violence that actually criticizes an algorithm. And the intuition says that the recommendations that actually came out on the algorithm went against what that person would have done. So you need to have the ability to be in disagreement with what a chat box or an algorithm produces. This is something that we need to consider. It's key. It's key when using technology. You need to know how it works. Otherwise, we're not going to use it properly. And we might end up doing systematically wrong, apart from structural problems or losing language, wealth, because you always use the same expressions the whole time, because those are the ones that pop up. Because if you talk about conflicts and whether Palestinians have the right to freedom, you see that it replies to you, oh, it's a complex issue, because the texts in English are the ones that they are. If you ask ChatGPT in Spanish, it'll give you a different reply. So be really careful, because you're transposing a technology which is trained by databases from the global north. And we need to consider all contexts. And there are other things behind that. Rather than a question, that was a bit of a comment. So the question is, maybe to suggest that, rather than just marketing, we should consider these issues when we design technology. I share some of what you've said, some of what you've raised, but in others, I don't. We're only at the first versions now. All the problems that you mentioned are true, but they're normal. These are the first versions of these chatbots. To make a comparison, when we were starting out with internet, I use this example a lot in my company. When we used to go to banks to say to banks, oh, you can have electronic banking or mobile banking so that clients can access, and they said, no, that's impossible. Internet will never allow that. And it was HTTP. There wasn't HTTPS. The S at the end didn't exist. They were right, of course, but we were at the first version. If I now say to my children, you can't access your bank online, they think I'm mental. We just connect online just normally. But in the first years of internet, it was a problem. So I think you're right to highlight that there are many, many areas that are problematic. Of course, the system needs to be improved. Of course it does. But there's a child that's just been born. It's only a few months old. I think it's an issue of time here. It really is an issue of time. Predictions. There's a book that's really, really interesting. It was called Prediction Machines. And that talks about AI and its prediction mechanisms. I don't want to debate whether you predict well or badly. For weather, for its predictions, normally they're okay. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get it wrong. It rains when it shouldn't do. But there are algorithms that improve over time. So there are algorithms that aren't true. Yes, of course there are. There are algorithms that don't have sufficient data or a big enough database to predict the future. Of course they exist, but things will change. It's a path we're on. There are, I'm sure, many examples of algorithms that don't work, but there are examples of algorithms that work really well. And now, the issue of how we can use all of this, because at the end of the day, we can use all of this to also develop a city, a territory, an area, cities. And I think this is something what Juanjo was driving at. Yeah, we do have a problem. We now depend completely on technological platforms, which are the ones that have developed these long language models. Of the first five of them, all five of them are North American. Only one of them that Miriam mentioned yesterday, she spoke about Meta and Amados that have a commercial version, but only one of them is the most used. So we're in the hands of technology that is designed and maintained by a group of companies that are going to be the next Google, Amazon, etc. This is something that Europe really needs to think long and hard about and think about what they're going to do. Are we going to use this open platform and develop this technology Are we going to be users, just pure users? Are we going to try and be ethical about things? Or are we going to, as Juanjo said, get involved in sustainable competitiveness and get involved in models that allow us to be competitive and sustainable? That's an idea, because a huge debate about what can and what can't be done. I'm less worried about whether this works or not. I think there are things that do work and things that don't. And there are things that don't work now but will do in the future. I think there's so many things that need to be done. And what's around the corner, what's coming, is fascinating and very deep. We'll talk about this later. Thank you so much. I share with some of the things that you've said, and others I think need to be qualified. And their application in specific cases in municipal level in today. And these are predictive. We also spoke this morning about how we are aware, all of those that are in this technology, well, that there are biases. Before implementing any technological solution, we need to, of course, guarantee that these biases have been eliminated, or there are balances and checks to them, or they've been minimized. Of course, what we need to do is to make these models predictive. And I can share with you a very simple example of that, which is in your the water network, which is using a predictive model thanks to the fact that we've got good quality data, lots of good quality data, because for these models to be predictive, what we need are good quality data. And we need to be able to also design a model with all those variables that accept the results. In this case, we've got both of these. We've got good data quality, and we've got a good team that's able to pinpoint those aspects which directly lead to breaks in the water network. Thanks to this data quality, thanks to the team of professionals that are able to define a good model that really has a direct effect on the way local water supplies are managed, we can actually anticipate and predict possible breakages. This leads to greater efficiency, better management, less water waste, and improved services to the public by avoiding water being turned off. This is a way that AI, if it's applied properly with good predictive model, can actually help us and makes us smarter, all of us. Yes, there's still a long way to improve and things can be bettered. Of course there is, but things are already being used today. Tools, of course, complementary to the humans, but they help us become more intelligent. I have no doubt about that. How we handle a mistake is very important. How do we handle mistakes? You said, oh, it's the first days, you know. I remember a few years ago, I was in a workshop with a consultant that said his first job had been to work in a factory with boxes. And at the end of the day, the majority of his colleagues had cuts on their hands, but he didn't. And he was new. And they said to him, why do you end up cutting your hands? How come your hands don't get cut? And he says, oh, I read the instructions. Number one, put the gloves on. That was instruction number one, put your gloves on. So the National Institute of Science and Technology in the US, which this year published its framework on risk management of AI, in one of its points has a section which is key, but it's hidden there amongst the 50 pages. But I think it's really important because it says there's not one single agent that can predict the whole effect of this technology. You need lots of them. So it's a matter of how you start controlling things. You need a method. If there are no further questions, I would like to close, ask you to say a few words about something that came up in all our presentations, and that which is in Mark Coeckelbergh's presentation, which is that we're in a situation in which there's a huge asymmetry between the public and governments, or public and institutions, but also between societies and the big corporations who actually control the whole of this system. How can we emerge from this profound asymmetry and respect human rights? That's the main challenge. Is it possible? Isn't it possible? How do you feel? Just a quick reply. If you want a quick reply, just a headline reply. It's possible if we can include the viewpoints of all institutions, companies, and public-private cooperation, which is so necessary. If we all accept and we prioritize SDGs, if we use technology as a tool, then we should be able to make a fairer, sustainable society. We also develop our own technology so that we can be a little bit more independent, or at least not so dependent on large corporations. That's another possibility. Now that people talk about, or they used to talk about, digital sovereignty. How can we have sovereignty spaces in this area, which is not just linked to a territory? To summarize in a sentence, I'd say, referring to what Goya said, the dream of technological progress and control of democracy may end up producing monsters. It's going to change. Technology is going to change the way we see ourselves in the world, the way we play in the world. But if we don't incorporate democratic values to production and use, then I don't know what sort of a world we'll end up with.
Joseba. Well, a headline. We need many more Bilbao European encounters and Bilbao global encounters. We need all sorts of encounters, and we need to spend a lot of time talking and thinking about this. That's it. That's a headline. The nature of a headline is short, so I'll stop. I won't go on. Thank you very much. Yes, because I think in philosophy, we often say that when someone asks you something, you have to make the implicit tacit. And I think this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to really, bring to the surface everything that's underneath all of this and putting it in the public space in order to find solutions and alternatives. So thank you very much. César. I'm just going to say something that I've said before, and that is that technology only becomes progress when everyone arrives. It's impossible to do it in any other way. Thank you very much to all four of you. Thank you to all of you as well. It's been a pleasure to share this time with you. This afternoon, 4 o'clock, we have a workshop which is going to be run by our colleagues from Alboan to try to empower citizens to see what's behind this technology. And then at 7 o'clock in the evening, if I'm right, Mikel, anyone who's interested, downstairs, there's a beers and politics chat or talk led by Eva Silvan and Cristian Preto. Thank you very much to all of you then. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. And we will see you back here at 4 o'clock this afternoon, although the interpreting service won't be available in the afternoon. It finishes now. Thank you all very much, and we wish you a very pleasant day.